Hello, everybody, and welcome to my podcast. Uh, this is my guest for today, and I'm very, very happy that he's here. David Grand, I'm sure a name that you all have heard, um, long known for his work with EMDR and the developer and really the disseminator of brain spotting, which is an entirely different kind of treatment than probably most of you are used to doing, unless you're already brain spotting fans. So, David, I think we must have met 20 years ago,
At least.
at least. I think it was at an EMDRIA conference, if I remember.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. And I was probably teaching somatic interventions for EMDR,
Hmm.
is what I'm guessing.
Yeah, that's what my memory tells me as well.
Yes. And at the time, I was so pleased to meet you because you were creating these wonderful bilateral stimulation audio tapes,
Hmm.
which I was using constantly.
Hmm.
And using them in probably a different way than you intended. I used them a lot as just as continuous bilateral stimulation through the session, so that they were already in a somewhat altered state
Hmm.
before we began more traditional EMDR processing.
Hmm.
Um, so that was a, a wonderful stage. You've always been an innovator, I think.
Um, I, no matter what I'm doing, I'm always looking for more, and I'm always looking to see what my clients deliver to me. Um, if you want to understand how brain spotting came to be and how it's developed, it is almost entirely what my clients gave to me directly or indirectly.
Right,
So it's really it's not just client centered, it's client driven and client derived.
right, right. Right. As I always say, my clients have been the best teachers. And so, how did you discover it?
Well, I like to say I didn't discover it, I noticed it.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is it's not like it wasn't there for everybody to see. You know, I was working with a championship level ice skater who was I had worked with her for a year of 90-minute sessions, doing a combination of modified EMDR and somatic work and relational work going back to my psychoanalytic, psychodynamic days. And she was stuck on this one jump called the triple loop that unless you're able to do that in the short or the long program, you can't complete, what you're supposed to do. And no matter, and it wasn't the hardest jump, but she would skate, turn up, jump in the air once, twice, and instead of completing the third revolution, she, using skater terms, would pop out of it after two jumps, and she would do a double loop, which didn't meet the compulsory requirements. No matter what we did, that was everything was worked through, that was left. So I had her not just imagine herself visually, but also experience somatically doing the jump in slow motion and just kind of freezing it at that moment where she popped out. And I was doing very slow eye movements, so much so that many people would say it's not even EMDR, which I disagree, because it's a tracking process. And just as I got right over here, her eye went into this intense wobble like this, and
Hmm.
then froze up. And it felt like a hand grabbed my wrist and held it in place. So instead of seeing it as a tracking problem that needed to be ameliorated, you know, it was right, there was something right there that her nervous system was beckoning to me from.
Yeah.
And over the next 10 minutes, she went through this intense processing and she was literally seeing videos of unresolved traumas on my fingertips, and she was illustrating them as they were happening. About halfway through, I didn't know it was halfway at the time. After 5 minutes, she started to have traumas that we had processed through to a so-called zero suds open up and start processing through to a much deeper level. That actually got my attention as much as the first 5 minutes did, because you know you think you've gotten to the bottom of something, you find out there's a lot more dissociative barriers and layers. And after 10 minutes in total, her eye just relaxed, the processing slowed down, and we finished the session. And I was, quite taken by this, but I didn't really know what it was. But she called me the next morning from the skating rink and she said, David, I just did a triple loop with no problem. And to
Oh,
test it out, I went out and I did it again and again and again. And she had never had a problem with that again. So I
oh,
was challenged by this situation. Well, what really was that? Was that something just particular to her? Or is this something that has application to other clients or all clients? So I started to look for these eye anomalies as I was doing the slow tracking. And anytime I would see one, like a hard blink, a double blink, or another twitch sort of movement, I would stop there and have the client just keep on following their processing. And I saw with most clients, it went deeper and deeper and deeper. A few clients literally said, I feel it all the way in the back of my head, which
it-
was yeah, which was really fascinating. And that was that was 23 years ago, and that was the origination story of Brainspotting.
wow. Wow. And then you just kept doing it and getting more and more information from client after client.
And a lot of my about half of my practice was therapists, and most of them doing EMDR and SC and other therapies like that. So I didn't tell them what happened with the skater. I didn't tell them what I was going to do, but I stopped on those reflex spots with them. And I said, just see where your processing goes. And they were experiencing it on the inside. And then afterwards they say, David, what was that? And I told them the story with the skater. I didn't say go back to your practice and you try this out with your clients. But I knew that most therapists are experimenters, which is a wonderful thing. And they would come back the next week and the week after saying, I tried that thing and things just went deeper. Certain shifts happened faster or that weren't happening at all. So after about 2 to 3 to 4 weeks, I had a wealth of information and I knew that this was breakthrough technology.
Right, right, right. And I mean, again, I've never heard a therapist trained in brain spotting who didn't rave about it.
hmm Well, since 2003, every year brain spotting has evolved. So it's not just what it is, it's what it can become and what it ultimately does become. And it's under the influence of primarily my clients, but all the other people who are doing it and the trainers we have around the world. But brain spotting is an open, permeable model. So information from other modalities within psychotherapy or other healing modalities, or even just aspects of science, affect us and contribute to the evolution of brain spotting. Um, but I'll say over the first 4 to 5 years, it became a very technical therapy, and we found different ways of finding eye positions. Um, but I realized after 5 years, and I'm a dyed-in-the-wool clinician, just like you are, going back, over 4 decades as you are. I realized that relational imperative uh, lost its prominence, and I started to really recognize that it's not just the attunement to the visual field and the somatic field, but it's the relational attunement to the client that is so powerful. And we know from studies that that's the common factor in all successful psychotherapies. So I started to mindfully put together the relationship and the eye positions and the body processing, and which I called the dual attunement frame.
Right, right, right. Because that's what it ultimately is about. It's about attunement.
100%.
Yeah, yeah. So, so when you teach people about that dual attunement framework, what do you teach them?
We teach them the relationship comes first.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, this is our common territory. I've studied with you. I've sat in on your workshops and so on. And again, I continue to learn from you. Um, uh, in if you look at the other technical therapies or brain body based therapies, the relationship is always there, but it's never articulated as the most important aspect and what we
Mhm.
have to pay attention to first. And we do that in brain spotting, and we say that the neurotechnical, the awareness of the body experience and the visual processes comes second, then is superimposed on the relationship. That's what it's, the dual attunement frame.
Right, right. And I assume it's not just the conversation that leads to starting the brain spotting piece, but it's also in the body language, tone of voice, kind of the presence of the therapist.
100%. 100%. And I'll give you, I'm going to throw in another idea here that relates to the frame. Um, in brain spotting, we recognize what we call the uncertainty principle, which is based on the fact that the human nervous system has between 1 to 4 quadrillion synaptic connections. A quadrillion is when you take a billion and multiply it by a million. So why we call this the uncertainty principle, because when a person is sitting in front of you with a nervous system that is essentially infinite, okay, the idea that your training, your diagnostic skills, all of this can tell you what's going on is an impossibility. The therapist is in a state of uncertainty. And we
Right.
say in brain spotting, in the face of uncertainty, all we have is the frame. And that when the client comes to the first session, they're bringing their frame of their neuro experience, their entire life trajectory, their development. But what led them to specifically reach out and to come in for therapy now?
Right. Right.
And that the brain spotting therapist mindfully receives this frame, the client's frame, and holds and shapes it with them, and then follows what we call the focus mindfulness processing that happens as a result of and in the context of this frame. But I'll go back to what I said before. We say, in the face of uncertainty, all we have is the frame.
Right.
That's a powerful redefinition of psychotherapy and really what we know and what we can know. But also, if you recognize that the nervous system is essentially infinite, you recognize that not only are the wounds and the dissociative barriers based on trauma in that nervous system, but the capacity to heal is totally in that nervous system. You know, it's not in the wisdom and the experience and the training of the therapist.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't think that would for if the therapy were dependent on the wisdom and the experience of the therapy, then it in my mind it wouldn't be healing. It would just mean, oh, people can hurt you or they can have a positive effect on you. But in the end, you're dependent on the kindness or cruelty of others,
Mhm.
which is just does not seem like the right kind of healing for trauma.
Mhm. Well, you're speaking the language of brain spotting when you say that, Janina.
Yeah, yes. And and so um when clients come in with with whatever this sort of story du jour is, right? I've been really depressed this week. Um, you know, I feel like I'm getting worse instead of better. How do you frame that?
Well, we don't frame that. We see it as a frame that we receive.
Okay, so the frame,
Okay.
is.
It's the clients, and that we hold their frame with them. And the idea is that something happens in their neuro experience and in their processing that is different than if we weren't there receiving and holding that frame with them. And in that context, the processing, the focused mindfulness processing, is like a comet that has its own trajectory, and the therapist tries to get into the tail of the comet and follow the head of the comet wherever it goes. Because so many psychotherapy models are based on the therapist being the head of the of the comet, whereas it just doesn't make sense or work neurobiologically. Um, so we absolutely trust the client's processing, and we see that processing as being healing in real time, and no matter what it looks like, it's always doing what it should be doing. And if we don't understand it, it's because it's so deeply subcortical, so deeply somatic, that it doesn't fit the thought or language. It's again, it's just deep within the client's neuro experience.
So if the client presented on the particular day with, I'm really depressed. I'm worse than I was last week. Um, how would where would you take that? How would you take that?
The first thing is we would make no assumptions about that. We would
Right,
take what they're saying as it is,
right,
okay,
right.
and be curious about it, and
Yes,
and receive it and hold it. We also see brain spotting as a developmental model. So we would see that not just as what happened in the last week or the last day, but also as a manifestation of their entire developmental history, you know,
right.
which is a very different way of looking at things than the diagnostic model, which is to say, oh, they're depressed, so this is what's going on, so this is what we're going to do. Um, and seeing everything developmentally, we also see it in terms of developmental trauma and dissociative survival response.
That's
So
right.
so we would receive it, be curious about it. We'd invite the client to say whatever they want to say about it, as long as they want to say about it. But at the same time, we would look to shape and that frame with them. But I'm going to give you something that every therapist who listens to this can observe and make use of. The client who comes in and said, "I've really had a bad week. I've been even more depressed than usual." We watch where the client's eyes go from the moment they come in and as they're talking. So if the client, I'll illustrate now. If the client says, "I've had a terrible week and I've been feeling even more depressed than I was feeling before," the fact that the client's eyes went off to a
Yeah,
spot to us is information.
yeah,
Okay. And we might say to the client, because we have other ways of finding relevant eye positions, we might say to the client, "I notice you've been looking at a spot over here. Just, okay, go back. Right. You're on it right now. Keep looking over there. And right now, again, what are you feeling in your body? Where are you feeling all this in your body? And as you're looking over there, just notice what comes up, notice what comes next, basic
right.
mindfulness processing. And that, wherever it goes, would be not only relevant information, but it would be visually focused relevant information, that the trajectory of that processing we've noticed is different than if the client is just kind of looking all around or occasional eye contact. There's something about, we call that a gaze spot in brain spotting.
Mhm.
And for you and for everybody who's watching this, you never have to come to a brain spotting training, read my book, and go to a workshop on brain spotting. This is information that is there. It goes with every client who comes in every session. And you can just at least notice it. But beyond that, even if you encourage the client to look there for a minute, 2 minutes, 3, 5 minutes, you'll likely see something happen that you haven't seen before.
Wow. Very cool.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. And I can just imagine, um, because it's true. Each per I mean, 10 people might have that same frame, but they might be gazing in very different directions.
They always would be. Yeah.
Yeah.
And a client can come in the next session and they were locked on that spot. They come in the next session, they start saying, well, I feel a little bit better, but I've had these struggles at work and so on. And they're on another spot, you know.
Yeah.
They usually do not lock on the same spot because they're in a different place and they're talking about different information.
Right. Right. But it's not, but the brain spotting therapist isn't judging, is it the same place, is it different? They're just in the moment with the client, noticing the spot that the client is noticing.
And then always following the client wherever they go.
Right. Right. Okay, and is it sometimes surprising where they go?
Always surprising. We say that when we follow the client's processing, we're always waiting for the surprise. Okay,
Uh-huh.
which would not have happened if you didn't have the same conditions providing it. In other words, a more interventive therapy. The idea is when this happens, you do this, or so on. Uh, will interrupt that natural trajectory that the client would have, even off of a spot. So literally, when you sit there and the client picks up your energy, that you're present, you're attuned, you're curious, but that
Mhm.
you trust their internal process, things will
Right.
happen in ways that are different. But when it comes to the surprise, I have a my own theories about it. That literally dissociation in very complex ways creates barriers between different parts of the self and of different kinds of information, you know, and that when a client all of a sudden says, I just made a connection. Okay. It's that something promoted that dissociative barrier to lift. And the information over here and the information over here connects up. And all of a sudden, something makes sense or feels right or reveals itself. That's in many iterations what the surprise is. You know?
Right. Right. And I'm a big believer in mindfulness and curiosity, so this makes sense to me. And do is it always events that come up as happened to your ice skater, or can it be feeling memories?
There's no always in brain spotting.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Um, um, it doesn't matter what comes up. If it is completely somatic, not only is that okay, we see that as being ideal. You know, somatic processing that never reaches conscious awareness is the deepest, most effective form of processing from our point of view. Um, but there is no right way to do this, and there are always infinite ways of doing it. And we know that no matter what it looks like, no matter what it sounds like, no matter how it fits into our worldview or our perspective, it's always something different than we could ever see it as being, even as it's happening. You know, um, so it's so liberating for a therapist to not have to know things that either they can't know or they can't really understand. And as they're happening so fast that whatever you're seeing, by the time you're seeing it, the client is already beyond that. They're already gone.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And it engenders humility in the therapist.
Right. 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 And it also gets rid of all the sort of psychodynamic interpretation. There doesn't have to be a conclusion or an insight.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, historically, um, psychoanalysis was broken into two parts. One was the theory, which led to the interventions, and the other was just the observation. The free association and the analyst being in a state of evenly hovering attention which was the model of following the client wherever they go. But when you have this theory base that says this is what it is and this is what you do,
Right.
it contradicts that.
Absolutely. I've thought about that many times, that there were aspects to the original uh, experience of psychoanalysis that we we incorporate in a new. I think mindfulness and curiosity takes us a little beyond where uh, free association. So it's wonderful. I mean, it sounds
Yeah.
really like great work.
I want to tell you two other ways that we find what we call relevant eye positions in contrast to them being random eye positions. Um, and we use a pointer for these two. The gaze spotting is wherever the person's looking in the environment. But the first one goes back to the discovery with the skater or the noticing with the skater, where a person, like the person comes in, they say they're very depressed. And you'll say, well, how activated are you, or what's the intensity 0 to 10, the old SUD scale, and they'll say, let's say an 8. You then go, there's no step by step protocol. You go straight from that activation to where do you feel it in your body. Okay, you don't know storytelling, not even discussion around emotions, go straight to the body. Okay, let's say he says, well, I feel like a heaviness on my chest. The first way we call outside window, because we're looking into the client's eyes and face, from the outside. And you go across very gradually, and you're looking for any kind of reflexive response. It could be, like I said, a hard blink or double blinks. Person could like lean forward. Sometimes the head recoils. A lot of times there's mouth movement, which is really interesting because that's related to, cranial nerves and so on. Person goes just like that. Any of those reflexes you see, you stop right there and you encourage the client to just notice, again, to go into that mindfulness process and to trust it, follow it, be curious about it. Okay. And usually you'll stay on that spot most of the way through the processing. That's called outside window, looking outside. The other way, this is the third way, is called inside window, where you're looking for where the client feels that activation the most, the presence of it the most, or access to it the most. So we do it first, across at eye level. Do you feel it more looking to your right? And then you give them 5, 10 seconds. More in the middle, same thing. Or more to your left. Let's say the client says it's to the left. Then we try to expand the horizon and say, is it more above eye level, at eye level, or below? Let's say it's above eye level. And we get it with precision. Okay, that's inside window because it's coming from the client's observation of their felt sense, you know, and and then the client will process from there. Sometimes the client will have more than one eye position during a session. Let's say you have that client goes 20 minutes processing off of that inside window spot, and all of a sudden they just spontaneously go like this. We never we never see that as a problem. We
Right.
never see that they're avoiding this. We're saying that the power, the energy directed them over there, and it was even more powerful than the energy that had brought them there in the first place. And they continue, so they'll have two spots. Um, so those are the three ways of finding relevant eye positions in brain spotting. And from there, again, that's that's the neuro experiential neurobiological part of the frame, on
Mhm.
top of focusing and deepening the primary relational frame.
Right, right. Very, very, very interesting. And you ever have clients who are body phobic and who can't tolerate the word body?
Brain spotting is a completely open model. If you ask a client, the client says, well, I'm feeling very anxious. And you said, well, where are you feeling it in your body right now? And they say, I don't know, or I'm not feeling it in my body. That is never seen as a problem in brain spotting. Okay. We tend to will be curious about whether they're in a state of hypoarousal, and that would be the reason why they're not in touch with the body experience. Or maybe they have a different language for this, and our language doesn't fit what their lexicon is. Um, or that maybe it's just something that we don't understand, you know? So if it's a zero sud that the person is upset, it's a zero suds, they're not feeling in the body. That's not a problem. That's a dynamic phenomenon, you know? And and in that case, that person may not be able to articulate where they feel it the most, but it
Mhm.
doesn't matter. We can just look for reflexes. They're
Right.
always there. Even if a person is hypoaroused or unable to articulate the body experience, their reflexes are going to come through. Or we just engage them to talk about what's bothering them and we wait for their eyes to and even their head and neck to jump up to an eye position. You see where you're looking? Keep looking over there. Okay.
Mhm.
We say in brain spotting, nothing is a problem unless you make it a problem. So clients who are body phobic, we see that is that's exactly how they should be for all of the developmental reasons that have brought them to this point.
Right.
And we never see it as a treatment problem or even a treatment challenge. We see
Yeah.
it as a dynamic phenomenon.
Right. 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 I, I've just had a lot of clients who were triggered by the word body, not by the word physical, not, lots of other words, somatic words they're fine with, but the word body
Mhm.
is triggering. But
And 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 that is deserving of and worthy of curiosity, as we both know.
absolutely, absolutely, yeah, yeah.
But have you heard in other models where if a person isn't in touch with their body experience or their emotions, where it's seen as a detriment or an impediment to the
Oh,
model?
I mean, that's the most frequent question I'm asked by therapists is what do I do if the client can't feel emotions or the body? And I said, well, I don't find that a problem.
That's like saying, what do you do if a client is experiencing hypoarousal? It's
Yeah,
like as if you can't work with hypoarousal,
right,
which is absurd. Also, embedded in hypoarousal is always hyperarousal, just like embedded in hyperarousal is always hypoarousal.
right.
So that is what's
Yeah.
out right now, and and for all the reasons that it should be.
But I think the difficulty for therapists is they've been trained to believe that you have to get to the client's emotions to process anything. And I don't see it that way. You obviously don't see it that way.
I would say it's a lot wiser and more efficient to just be able to access with the client their sensory experience.
Right, right. And I would say it's helpful to clients to access whatever they can access.
Mhm.
Right. And then,
You know what I say about clients who can't articulate or are not in touch with their body experience? They walked into the first session and they walked into this session, and their legs are the somatic expression of why they're here today, right now.
right, right. That's great. I love it. I'm, I'm going to remember that and quote you.
Uh, I would be honored if you did.
Well, David Grant, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so, so much. I really feel like I have a much more nuanced and complex and interesting uh, view of brain spotting.
Well, I have followed your work for decades and have been informed and inspired by you. So it's been an honor for me to be invited by you and to be here with you today.
Well, thank you. And it's an honor for me because I was inspired by you while I was trying to figure out how to be a therapist. So it's perfect. Oh, thanks so much.
Thank you.